Hello and welcome to a special look back at the G20 that was. I'm here at the Brisbane Convention Centre, which was the heart of the global summit. But now there are no leaders, no motorcades, no police or security details and no international media. So what's been agreed to for our $400 million spend?
Hello, Brisbane.
Barack Obama's Brisbane speech ensured climate change is on the list. So too is finding an Ebola solution. There's a commitment to see 100 million more women in the workplace over the next decade and an economic growth target which aims to expand the world's economy by $2 trillion. The barricades have come down and the communique has been released. The Brisbane Action Plan contains more than 800 separate reforms and an ambitious growth target.
If implemented, will achieve a 2.1% increase in global growth over the next 5 years.
As with all G20s, there are hundreds of recommendations, but no binding commitment for nations to follow through.
They can provide 2% additional growth if fully implemented. And I think that's the language to watch out for, if fully implemented.
In an apparent backflip after US President Barack Obama's passionate speech, Tony Abbott fielded several questions on the issue he originally didn't rate a top priority, climate change.
That G20 leaders, all of us, support strong and effective action to address climate change.
Sovereignty was addressed, with President Obama challenging Vladimir Putin.
If he continues down the path that he is on, violating international law, providing heavy arms to the separatists in Ukraine, the isolation that Russia is currently experiencing will continue.
Experts predict Mr. Putin will turn that to his advantage.
I'm sure that Putin will take that and go home and say that meant Americans should stay out of Iraq and Syria.
Regardless, Mr. Putin probably wasn't listening. He held a brief closed press conference with Russian media, then left before the final communique was released. Whitney, Angell, QUT News.
While the world leaders were making decisions, QUT researchers were collecting data on what others said about the leaders. And we said plenty. Obama sightings, motorcades, and occasionally the G20 agenda.
Definitely that it's worth tracking Twitter for G20. There's definitely not been anything done about a global event like this so far. We track sporting events and TV shows, but we kind of forget about maybe it's important to track this kind of event and see what the social interest in it is as well as the news. The social interest was actually quite interesting. The Obama speech was definitely a massive thing. There were 500 tweets per minute talking about some topics, 600 talking about other topics, equality, things like that. So it definitely went up significantly more than we thought it would. So the hypometer originally was a TV metric, so it gathered things for TV shows, and we adapted it to just gather just plain old tweets and branded it the hypometer for consistency's sake. But definitely the most hype was some of the biggest leaders, so Putin, Obama, and Tony, of course, because he said a few things that caught the media. We also had a lot of climate change, and just before the G20 started, on my agenda.
While Katie and the hypometer handle the raw data, Richard Yang, a research assistant in the Creative Industries faculty, has been working on visualising it.
Well, it allowed us to sort of see where people were tweeting from, how relevant the tweets were to the events that were occurring in town. Potentially in the future, this is actually the first time that this sort of thing has ever been used. Brisbane hasn't really seen such a large-scale event since the Expo in 1988, and this has been a very useful way of sort of showing how people respond to such large events in the city. And obviously this is all public information, so people tweet knowing that their stuff will sort of be available for everybody to see, but definitely in terms of natural disasters, it may greatly increase the response time for rescue teams.
We were all waiting to see the US President's Brisbane speech, and he delivered a tough message on climate change, calling for global unity to save the environment. But there were lighter notes in his address as well. The packed auditorium erupted as President Obama walked onto the stage.
Hello, Brisbane. It's good to be back in Australia.
And he charmed the audience with some local lingo.
When I arrived, they advised I needed some 4X. You have some.
The auditorium quietened as Mr. Obama denounced the downing of MH17, offering his support to those affected.
As your ally and friend, America shares the grief of these Australian families, and we share the determination of your nation for justice and accountability.
But the clear focus of his speech was climate change and the need for immediate action. He referenced the pact he signed with the Chinese government to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
And if China and the United States can agree on this, then the world can agree on this. We can get this done. That all countries, whether you are a developed country, a developing country, or somewhere in between, you've got to be able to overcome old divides, look squarely at the science, and reach a strong global climate agreement next year.
And then he brought it squarely home to Australia's responsibility to act.
Because I have not had time to go to the Great Barrier Reef, and I want to come back, and I want my daughters to be able to come back, and I want them to be able to bring their daughters or sons to visit. And I want that there 50 years from now.
Those in the audience won't forget the experience.
It was amazing. He's such a great public speaker. I think everyone in there was just so excited to see him in person and hear everything he had to say.
It was a really, really great experience. I mean, you see him, you watch his speeches on YouTube, but I don't think anything can beat actually being in his presence, hearing him in person.
Brisbane gave the president a standing ovation. And he responded by giving the audience even more than they'd hoped for. Georgia Terry, QUT News.
It's the size of 2 football fields, big enough to house thousands of overseas and domestic media crews. Only accredited journalists are allowed in the 10,000 square metre site, passing through various security checkpoints before entering the buzzing hub. The stats of the centre were impressive. A 4-ton screen hanging from the ceiling, made up of 324 individual TV sets. 36 cameras within the media centre and 10 more operating across the city. Venue planning took more than a year, but construction moved at a much faster pace.
So in 2 weeks, they created this out of an empty exhibition hall, including 10,000 square metres of carpeting.
The international media are impressed.
So it looks very nice. People are extremely friendly. The media centre is extremely well prepared.
And soon the G20 message was being relayed to viewers back home.
Because, let's be honest, it looks like a very good story, and the Russian fleet sailing out.
There were many issues to cover.
Just like the economy, development, and the environment.
Growth, jobs, peace, climate. So, yeah, this is the agenda leaders should talk about.
You guys described it as shirt fronting, which an expression we aren't familiar with in Canada, but I managed to work it into my story today.
Mr. Abbott should know that Mr. Putin is also one of the toughest politicians in the world. He also have a black belt in judo.
The morning after the summit, the International Media Centre had gone. Crews disassembling 960 purpose-built workspaces and removing around 200 kilometres of broadcast cable. Influential global leaders may have been the focus of the G20, but their spouses were here too, and they took the opportunity to meet and greet with some unique Aussies. It was smiles all round for the cuddlier side of the G20. One local who won visitors over was Major, this 3-year-old koala.
Some are definitely calmer than others.
The spouses fed kangaroos, stroked non-venomous snakes and got up close with wild birds, although some were more comfortable with the encounters than others. Stick around, there's plenty more G20 news after the break.